What the hell is going on at HAARP? You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. It's a good question. HAARP, you've probably heard of it before. It stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research. It's located in Gakona, Alaska. It was built in 1993. That's when they started working on it, at least. And a lot of this came from the tireless advocacy of a senator called Ted Stevens. I mean, called Ted Stevens because that was his name. I digress. The question about HAARP has always been, what exactly are they doing? And conspiracy theories about this abound. Here's what we know, at least the official version of what and why. What they're doing is they're shooting radio beams up into the ionosphere. Well, what the f is the ionosphere? That's a good question. A lot of people don't know that either. The ionosphere is part of the upper atmosphere. There are various layers. There's the troposphere, the stratosphere, and then boom, we've got the ionosphere. It's pretty big, and it's kind of think of it like a shell of electrons and charged atoms or molecules. A lot of it is reacting to the ultraviolet energy sent by the sun. So what we're doing, we being the people at HAARP, in theory, is shooting up radio beams into the ionosphere to see how they could affect radio communication, how they could affect solar flares, or how solar flares might affect terrestrial technology. That's the official version. Now you'll hear some more cynical people who are members of groups that want to stop HAARP say stuff like basically the United States government spent hundreds of millions of dollars to shoot part of the atmosphere and, you know, see what would happen. Just roll the dice, right? The scary thing is that kind of reasoning is believable because governments have funded scientific projects like that in the past. And, you know, maybe one day if you're interested, we can run a list of some of the more ridiculous projects. But the conspiratorial side, if it's true, is much more frightening, and that's the idea that this ionospheric stimulation would be able to produce natural disasters like hurricanes, typhoons, earthquakes, real end-of-the-world type stuff, or that it could affect people's minds somehow. Now, as you probably already know, skeptics dismiss these claims entirely. And why do they do that? It goes down to an argument of scale. The amount of interference that the HAARP station in Alaska is able to enact upon Earth's ionosphere in general is, you might hear it compared to throwing a rock in the Pacific Ocean, you know, or trying to cut down a tree with like a pair of sewing scissors. Are those a thing? Really small scissors. Point being that HAARP itself doesn't seem to have enough energy in order to affect a worldwide system, much less target parts of that system remotely. So for the sake of argument, let's say that some of this might be true. Well, if we looked at that, our evidence would be the following. One, we know that weather modification already does exist and has existed for a very long time, primarily in the form of cloud seeding, which we have an episode about in our series on weather modification. Second, we know that someone who worked at DARPA did apply for a patent, and they were granted a patent for something that could perhaps affect the weather in the way that some HAARP opponents believe HAARP can. But here's the catch. He never actually built this machine that he got a patent for. It's almost a thought exercise based on calculations that say, you know, well, HAARP is this big, 180 high-powered antennas across 30 acres versus how big it would need to be, or how big something would need to be in order to have a larger world system-wide effect. And that's not all. There's also a couple of very interesting conversations with high-level world leaders. At the United Nations in 2010, then President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said that HAARP was directly responsible for floods in Pakistan. That same year, Hugo Chavez also alleged that HAARP was messing with the weather, weaponizing it, and blamed the Haitian earthquake on HAARP. We also know one-time Secretary of Defense William Cohen here in the United States said that terrorists were investigating new methods of attacks. And he named a bunch of stuff, like he named breeding some sort of new form of genetically modified insect that would become a disease vector. He talked about creating natural disasters, weaponizing climate change, a couple of other very strange things that you can read in his interview in full, which is posted online. And we'll have a link to it in the description down here. So when we ask what the hell's going on at HAARP, on one side we have people saying, well, it's doing, largely abstract research. We're just monitoring things to learn how systems work, which is a great thing to do, right? And on the other side, we have people say, no, it's something nefarious, and that the rise in natural disasters, or the perceived rise in natural disasters, is occurring in some way because of man's intervention via HAARP. And we do know that there's some fairly good evidence that people can make some natural disasters. There's compelling evidence that fracking, for instance, is nudging things a little bit closer toward earthquakes in some parts of the world. And it's certainly not improving the water. It's literally the nicest thing I can say about fracking and water. But the real answer between these two, this harmless research, this supervillain worthy level weather machine, is just this. HAARP, for now, is doing nothing. Bupkis, jack, negative something. They're doing nothing, and they're doing nothing because the United States Air Force decided to stop funding HAARP. It was a little bit of a surprise to some of the people who were actively working at HAARP, and the reasoning that they gave for closing down the project was that they had only ever intended this to be a project, right, for a certain span of time, it's implied. They offered the University of Alaska a chance to pick it up after they commit to the $5 million a year it takes just to keep the thing running. No word yet from the university at the time of this recording. Now, HAARP shutting down is not in itself abnormal because HAARP doesn't run the whole year round. Due to its location in Alaska, they have to close down and winterize stuff. And one of the reasons that the Air Force gave for their announcement now is that they wanted to save money that they would have to spend otherwise on winterproofing everything. Because as you imagine, winter in Alaska can be tough on equipment, especially if it's delicate radio equipment. So at this point, HAARP might still open up again if somebody agrees to take on the bill of funding it and continue this research. Now, if you are one of the people who believes that this is conducting research that might later be crucial, right, it might protect us from solar flares, etc., then of course you would want HAARP to continue. If you are an opponent of HAARP, then you might be one of those NIMBY people, not in my backyard, who would rather HAARP exist anywhere else other than their town in Alaska, or you might be fundamentally opposed to it. At this point, neither side can really make the call whether this is a good or a bad thing, because the University of Alaska might still decide to fund the HAARP program. If I could pick anybody in the world to ask about HAARP and just say, give it to me straight, man, just the facts, then one of my first picks would be that Senator Ted Stevens we mentioned earlier, the guy who really spearheaded the initiative to build HAARP. I wouldn't get my wish, of course, because he died in a still unexplained plane crash in 2010. Thanks so much for watching. We hope that you enjoyed this little update on the state of HAARP. So if you want to learn more about whether people can actually make natural disasters, if you want to learn more about how many politicians and heads of state tend to die in plane crashes, or if you would like to learn more about fracking, stay tuned. Check out some of our older video series. Please check out our new natural disasters video coming out later this week. And also, we have an audio podcast where we're able to go into much more depth. We even read listener mail, which reminds me, we'd like to hear from you. If you have a suggestion for us to cover in an upcoming episode, if you have some feedback about fracking, HAARP, natural disasters, the ionosphere, etc., then please send us an email. We are conspiracy@howstuffworks.com.
He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. Stay tuned.